participating in this press conference about climate litigation. We have here quite a number of very interesting speakers that will give information, up-to-date information about a number of climate cases that are happening worldwide. My name is Wendell Trio. I'm the Director of Climate Action Network Europe, and I will say a little bit about the European People's Climate Case later on, but allow me to introduce the panel first. So we have Jep Sano from the Philippines, we have Nina de Prater from the Netherlands, Lisa Guldner from Germany, Saif O'Neill from Ireland, and myself. And so I will start with giving the floor to Jep to talk about the initiatives that they've taken in the Philippines.
Thank you very much, Wendell, and good afternoon to our friends from the media especially. I think this is the third time I'm presenting this major victory for climate justice this week to our media friends. So I just like to underscore how important this victory is for all those who want to see the fastest, most rapid transition, especially in the energy sector. And for us, this is really the beginning of the end of the fossil fuel stranglehold over our energy systems, but more importantly in our political systems. We were motivated when we filed this case 4 years ago, or this petition with the Commission on Human Rights in the Philippines. We were motivated by the fact that many Filipinos already are suffering from the adverse impacts of climate change. And we very well know that when climate change is felt in the most profound ways by many communities, not just in the Philippines, but in many parts of the world, it infringes on the enjoyment of basic human rights, even the right to life itself, and the right to safe homes, the right to education, the right to healthy environment, the right to self-determination, and the right to development. And all of these rights are being taken away for us. That spurred us to lodge this petition with the Commission on Human Rights, which is a national human rights institution and not a regular court, I must point out. So just as a summary, what we saw in terms of the announcement from the Commission on Human Rights this week here on the sidelines of COP25 is an unprecedented development, and it's a combination of messages coming from the Commission on Human Rights around the acknowledgement of the science, the clear science, and also the acknowledgement of the climate emergency. But the most important part of the findings that they presented is that all of these fossil fuel companies, as well as the oil, coal, gas, and cement companies who are respondents to this petition, can be found morally and legally liable for significantly contributing to global climate change. And I must emphasize as well that this is based on the Carbon Major study led by Rick Heady that served as the basis for calculating, the accountability for human rights harms under this petition. I must also emphasize that with this petition, or with the findings of the Commission, in our view, it makes it even morally and legally liable for these companies to further develop their fossil fuel infrastructure in the future. And so it is a clear signal for us, for the carbon majors, that they need to change their business, that they need to take all of these measures to ensure that human rights are not being violated through the impacts of their business. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jep. Then I'd like to give the floor to Nina de Prater from Milieudefensie.
Thank you. Some of you might know about the famous court case by the Urgenda Foundation against the Dutch state. This was a revolutionary and important climate case. And after 2 wins, this will soon come to a final verdict. The Supreme Court will rule on the 20th of December. But I'm not here to talk about that case, although it is very inspiring. It's a big inspire for our case. it's not only the governments who are responsible for the climate crisis, but also the fossil fuel industry. They are the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases. In the Netherlands, the Royal Dutch Shell is the biggest company and also responsible for almost 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and that's twice as much as the Dutch state. Despite the fact that Shell has known about the climate crisis, the cause and the impacts of climate change, it did not change its business model. In fact, Shell is very good at telling the green story. They've been doing that everywhere, also at this COP. But the company will not take responsibility and will not change. Last week, we and 16 other organizations published a report showing that Shell will be the second biggest investor in new fossil fuel projects in the coming years. They're the only company that will invest more is Gazprom. These investments will put the will bring us far beyond 1.5 degrees and even above 2 degrees. This is not only putting us in danger, but as Jep already said, it is a violation of human rights. Shell has no intention of changing by themselves, and that is why we are taking them to court. We, Milieudefensie, started this court case on the 5th of April this year. We are suing them for unlawful endangerment, and we are demanding that Shell reduces its CO2 emissions of its products and the production by 45% in 2030 globally, and to net zero in 2050. Last month, in November, we received Shell's official legal reply. In this reply, they make very clear that they don't take responsibility for climate change, and they argue why they should be able to continue exploiting gas and oil even after 2050. This is unacceptable, and we will continue the case. In the next months, we will be working on our reaction, and we can keep you updated through our website. I also brought summaries of our legal summons that you can get after this press conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Then I give now the floor to Lisa Gültner.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Lisa Gültner. I'm a climate expert with Greenpeace Germany, and I have the honor to speak about our German climate case. Germany is not a climate leader, and because of our government's inaction in the face of the climate crisis, we have sued our Chancellor Angela Merkel and her government. Germany committed to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 40% until the year 2020. And since 2007, every government has confirmed this goal. But fact is, Germany will clearly miss this target. And instead of increasing their efforts to keep their climate promise, the German government has officially abandoned it. So this is why 3 farming families, together with Greenpeace Germany, filed a lawsuit against the German government in October last year. We're taking the government to court for violations of the plaintiffs' constitutional rights to life and health, property, and occupational freedom, resulting from our government's refusal to take further action to meet its 2020 climate target. The 3 plaintiff families run organic farms in different regions in Germany, and they have already been directly harmed by the impacts of global heating. Klaus, for example, is an apple farmer close to Hamburg in Germany, and this year he has lost half his yield due to droughts and due to the codling moth, an insect that has previously not been home so far north. Following a year of delaying tactics by the German government and their lawyers, our case was finally heard in the Berlin Administrative Court in October this year. And for the very first time, a German court ruled that people's fundamental rights can be violated by the impacts of climate change, and that in principle, the German government can be held accountable for inaction in face of the climate crisis. The judgment is clear. Climate protection means protection of fundamental rights, and the German government has to respect this principle. Unfortunately, the Berlin Administrative Court felt too small for a big decision, and in the end, the judges dismissed our lawsuit. But with our complaint and with the judgment, we have built a solid foundation for further lawsuits to ask climate protection from the German government. And you can rest assured that this is not the end. We have decided, together with the plaintiffs, to not use the option to appeal the judgment, because since we filed our lawsuit, the legal basis in Germany has changed, since the German government adopted a climate law only a couple of weeks ago. But as I said, our fight for climate justice is not over, and we're looking into new approaches to hold the German government accountable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. I now will give the floor to Saif O'Neill.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Saif O'Neill, and I'm here representing Friends of the Irish Environment, which is a small organisation that has taken the Irish government to court. So our case was launched in 2017 as a judicial review of the government's National Mitigation Plan, which was adopted under our climate legislation dating back to 2015. But as many of you will be aware, Ireland is long regarded as a laggard EU member state. We are on course to miss all of our EU 2020 targets, and we're still off course to meet our 2030 targets. And even these targets, as we know, are not consistent with the obligations that the Irish government has under the Paris Agreement. So last year, Ireland came last in a CAN Europe ranking on climate ambition, last of the EU member states in the Climate Change Performance Index, with a very low performance. This year, Ireland has gone from very low to just low, but this is like going from an F grade to an E- grade, so there's nothing much to celebrate about that. So why is Ireland's performance so poor? Well, we believe that the main reason is weak governance arrangements, lack of political leadership, and a legacy of weak climate policy and very poor planning. So we asked the High Court whether the government was entitled to adopt a plan that would result in increased emissions over the period 1990 to 2020 and over the lifetime of the plan, and knowing in advance that these increased emissions would lead to serious environmental and climatic impacts and, of course, fundamental rights breaches. The government argued that it had a wide range of discretion and that the plan was non-justiciable on separation of powers grounds, and that the plan and the legislation entitled the government to postpone making emission reductions to some point in the future. Yet we know that a Paris-aligned climate policy requires deep cuts in the near term to avoid overshooting the 1.5 or even 2 degree carbon budget. Ireland's per capita emissions are the third highest in the EU, and this means that we're going to overshoot our equitable share of the global carbon budget as soon as 2027. The government's new climate plan for net zero emissions by 2050 also overshoots even a minimally equitable fair share of the global carbon budget. So the political impacts of the case in the Irish context are quite interesting, I think, because while we lost at the first instance in the High Court, our campaign succeeded in galvanising public interest. And while the courts agreed with the state that it could not intervene in the policy process, the government at the same time published, guess what, a new climate plan, and its promise to introduce some new climate legislation to strengthen the very governance arrangements that essentially allowed it to win in the High Court. We secured over 18,000 signatures of support for the case so that we could say we were taking the case in the name of these people who signed the petition. And our courtrooms were packed out for the judgment and for the case when it was heard in the High Court. So at the moment we have lodged a leave for appeal, and we're just waiting for a decision from the Supreme Court in relation to that. And it's very likely that many of these issues, including some very important constitutional points about rights to an environment, will be discussed and debated and argued again in the Supreme Court. So I think to conclude, I would say that the courts in the Irish context are a very important forum not only to step in where there is political and policy failure, but to determine the precise nexus between science and policy. The Irish court has been a vehicle for holding, or the Irish case has been a vehicle for holding our government to account and to enforce existing EU environmental law. And even though we haven't succeeded yet in the climate case, other very important cases in Ireland in the past couple of years have resulted in the closure of 2 peat-fired power stations by the end of 2020 out of 3. So this is a very significant development, and I think it shows that litigation can succeed sometimes where politics has failed. Thank you.
Thank you, Saif. Then I would now like to give the floor to Cecilia Erba.
Thank you. I am Cecilia Erba from the Italian NGO A Sud, and I'm here representing the Italian climate case. Italy is already experiencing the serious consequences of climate change. We are warming twice as fast as the rest of the world, and for the last month, unusually heavy rains and floods have been swamping our country from north to south, with victims and damages to buildings and infrastructure. According to the Global Climate Risk Index, in Italy in 2018 alone, there were more than 9,000 deaths placed due to extreme meteorological events, placing us worldwide at the 6th place for number of victims. Despite all of this, the Italian governments have not taken adequate action to protect its people from the impacts of climate change. Since 1990, our emissions have been cut by only 17%, while the IPCC in 2007 asked developed countries for at least a 25% reduction by 2020. Our perspectives for the future are not any better. According to the proposed Italian National Energy and Climate Plan, submitted at the beginning of this year, even with the implementation of all foreseen policies, the Italian greenhouse gas emissions will have declined in 2030 by only 39% compared to 2010. This is not nearly enough, according to the IPCC Special Report 1.5 adopted in October 2018. For years now, our politicians have been saying that they are worried about climate change. For years, they have been saying that they are taking measures and scaling up ambition. This is not true, and we are fed up with their inaction and their continued support of polluting energy sources. This is why we have decided to take the Italian state to court. Our case will be a civil law case based on human rights. We will not ask for economic compensation, but we will ask the judge to recognize that by not adequately fighting the worst consequences of climate change, the Italian state is violating the human rights of its population, that climate change puts at risk, such as the human right to life, to health, to food and water, to a safe environment, and so on. Such a decision would be a crucial precedent in the Italian case law, establishing an all-too-evident link between human rights and climate change. We will then ask the state to cut its emissions and abide by the recommendations made by the science and specifically by the IPCC. Only by following such recommendations at global level would it be possible to comply with the Paris Agreement and avoid global warming of more than 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels. Finally, we will take on the right to information. According to the Paris Convention, citizens must be informed and involved in environmental matters. However, the Italian state has failed to inform its citizens of the consequences of its policies and the serious risks implied for the Italian population. The communication campaign that anticipates the case has been launched on the 5th of June this year by a coalition that is now composed of more than 100 organizations, committees, movements, and other realities dealing with environmental conflicts. The objective of the Giudizio Universale, or last judgment campaign, is to make the case known among the civil society. We don't want this to be a litigation made by a few people. We want it to be everyone's case, the case of the whole Italian population, asking the state to take climate change seriously and to protect the fundamental human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecilia. Just to conclude, we've heard a number of national cases. Can Europe is also supporting 10 plaintiffs and the indigenous Sami organization in a case they've brought before the European Court of Justice, complaining that the EU climate ambition, as it is translated in 3 specific pieces of legislation, the emissions trading scheme, the emissions outside of the emissions trading scheme, and the land use emissions, that all are not sufficiently high enough to protect Europeans against the impacts of climate change. And these plaintiffs are similar to what has been said before. They're either farmers, they're people active in the tourist industry that really see their economic future and that of their families under threat and hence why they have made this complaint to the European Court of Justice. The court is still under review of the complaint, and we will have to wait for a final conclusion from them on the next steps of the case. So for the moment, there's not much that we can further say. So having said that, you have heard quite a nice overview of many different cases with many different targets. We have a number of minutes left for questions. If you want to ask a question, please raise your hand. There's microphones running around, and please introduce yourself if you have a question. Any questions? Yes.
Thank you. My name is Fredika from Uganda, Africa. Mine is a comment. First of all, thank you for all the efforts you are doing to mitigate climate change. I just want to bring to your attention that the impact in Africa is real, especially with farmers. And if you are following Uganda, we are facing it, especially with rural farmers and facing drought and famine. I got inspired by your efforts, and I'm wondering how I can apply them back home. But just to seek for your support in guiding and maybe working together in partnership to see that mitigation is done.
Okay, thank you very much. I think maybe we can touch base after this press conference. I have a question over there.
Petra Pinzer from the German weekly Die Zeit. I actually would like to know from you if you have an overview of all the cases that are running around the world and which one you think is the most likely to succeed. So which one should we actually follow?
Okay. Are there other questions? Well, let's take the other question too.
Thank you. Kevin O'Sullivan's my name from the Irish Times. And thank you for the different outlines of very significant litigation. I was just wondering, on a global scale, do any of the panel have a view on ecocide in terms of targeting big emitting companies or even countries or political leaders?
Okay. Anybody in the panel wants to take any of those questions? Yes, Nina.
I want to take two in one. I think one case that would be very interesting to follow is a case of Friends of the Earth France and Friends of the Earth Uganda that they are doing together. So that's also, I think, for you very interesting. They are taking Total to court because of their new oil exploration projects. So there you see that the NGO that is taking Total to court in France, because that is where their headquarters is for projects that they're doing abroad.
Okay, thank you. Carol, can you say anything about, can we have the mic? Here in the front row. So this is Carol Moffat from Ciel, a legal NGO.
On the question of are there cases, is there a map of the cases? There are actually several maps, and the problem is there are so many cases, they're growing so rapidly that figuring out which cases to follow, it can be very challenging. But from our perspective, that is a sign of the success of this strategy. In fact, we're seeing cases emerge in countries around the world, and you asked, are there cases that we think are promising, that there are opportunities to win? The Philippines Commission's inquiry is a testament to the fact that we are winning these cases, and communities around the world are winning them, and each of these cases is going to build on the others with evidence, with legal analysis, with the understanding that all of these cases implicate constitutional rights, constitutional duties, and human rights. And I think, among the cases that get very little attention, that should get more attention, is the investigation that's going on in Massachusetts by the Massachusetts Attorney General into Exxon because that one sounds in violations of consumer protection laws, which are shared by countries around the world. And so I think what we're likely to see is more and more evidence coming to light that these companies misled not only their own investors, but consumers and the public more broadly. And finally, on the question of ecocide, because it does link into this, one of the key findings from the Commission's inquiry in the Philippines was that there was evidence that would point to the existence of criminal intent, the potential that these companies obstructed the law, obfuscated, committed fraud that would give a foundation in criminal law, not just in civil law. And so each case that follows is going to be looking at, are these violations of human rights that are occurring, are they matters of tort, are they matters of constitutional law, or are they increasingly matters of criminal law?
Thank you, Carol. I see a number of questions in the back. Before the mic gets there, maybe just to comment on the number of cases. I don't have the number in my mind, but it's over 1,000. So it's really, this is only a short overview of the current cases that are going around. Yes, in the back.
Hi, my name is Keelan. I'm from the United States, and I was wondering if you could touch on maybe the effectiveness of litigating at a subnational level or even a community level instead of just approaching it through the federal level. Excuse me.
Okay, I saw another hand, or was that the same? Okay, I see a question there. And that will be the last one, I'm afraid. Here.
Just a comment from Canada that there is a subnational lawsuit going on. There are 7 youth in Ontario suing the Ontario government for their inadequate climate targets. And if you want to know more, my daughter's one of the plaintiffs.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments? Yes?
Just to add on to the comments around the last question on subnational effectiveness of subnational versus federal or national level lawsuits. I think we should do both. In terms of where the jurisdiction could prove to be more beneficial to any of these legal actions. But I must also point out in the Philippines petition, we did not lodge it with a regular court. So I would also encourage a lot of the vulnerable communities around the world to lodge it with human rights institutions, because we have proven that human rights institutions could be very sensitive to the issue of climate impacts on the most vulnerable.
Okay, our time is up. Thank you all for your interest, and thank you to all the speakers here, and keep up the spirit. Thank you.